General Motors plans to close its plant in Lordstown, Ohio.
General Motors temporarily shutting down more than half of its plants in North America.
Something just broke inside America's most powerful automaker, and the shockwaves are already moving through the economy in ways most people haven't noticed yet. General Motors didn't announce a recall. It didn't admit failure. It didn't call this a collapse. But behind closed doors, production lines have gone silent. Thousands of workers are bracing for the unknown, and nearly 1 million trucks are sitting unsold, quietly bleeding money every single day. This isn't a story about factories shutting down. It's a story about what happens when the system that predicts the future gets it dangerously wrong. GM believed demand would stay strong. Their data said buyers would keep coming. Their executives trusted the numbers. But real people changed faster than the models could adjust. And now the entire auto industry is paying for that mistake. Because when a company as large as General Motors misreads the market this badly, it doesn't stay contained inside boardrooms. It spills into dealerships, into small towns, into supply chains, and into your own wallet. Loan rates shift, trade-in values drop, car prices move in ways no one can fully control. And the most unsettling part? This may not be the last time something like this happens. Tonight, we're breaking down how GM reached this moment, why it happened so suddenly, and what it signals for the future of American manufacturing. By the end of this story, one thing will be clear. This shutdown is not an ending. It's a warning. And what happened next? No one at GM was prepared for. Real quick, if you're into videos that cut through the noise and break things down clearly, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find this. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. We've got more deep dives coming your way. Also, drop a comment and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your take. Now onto the video. General Motors did not slowly drift into this crisis. It slammed straight into it. Within days, more than half of the company's North American production network was brought to a standstill. Assembly lines that had run nearly non-stop for decades suddenly went quiet. Not because of labor disputes, not because of supply shortages, not because of safety issues, but because there was simply nowhere left to put the trucks. Inside GM's operations teams, the numbers had become impossible to ignore. Inventory was rising faster than sales. Dealers were refusing shipments. Storage yards were overflowing. Every unsold vehicle was sitting on borrowed money, accumulating interest, insurance costs, and depreciation with every passing hour. What had once been profit generators were now financial anchors pulling the company deeper into risk. Executives were forced into a brutal calculation: continue building vehicles and watch costs spiral out of control, or halt production and face the public consequences of a shutdown. Neither option was good, but continuing would have pushed the company into even deeper financial exposure. So they hit the brakes. For workers, the announcement landed like a shockwave. Shifts were cancelled without warning. Overtime disappeared. Entire departments were told to wait for updates that never seemed to arrive. Towns that depended on these factories for their economic survival were left holding their breath. Many had lived through previous downturns, but this felt different. This wasn't caused by a lack of demand. It was caused by too much supply. For dealers, the message was just as devastating. Their lots were already packed. Floor plan financing meant they were paying daily interest on vehicles that weren't moving. Some were facing six-figure monthly financing charges just to hold inventory. And now, instead of relief, they were watching the manufacturer itself grind to a halt. But the shutdown wasn't the real disaster. It was only the surface, because the true scale of what GM had built and failed to sell was far larger than anyone outside the company realized. And once the numbers came into view, the crisis took on a completely new meaning. The shutdown exposed a number so large it stunned even seasoned industry veterans. Nearly 900,000 trucks were sitting unsold across North America. That wasn't just excess inventory, it was a physical monument to a miscalculation that had been building for years. These trucks weren't neatly stored on dealership lots. They were scattered across temporary holding zones that had never been designed to store vehicles. Entire airfields were converted into parking grounds. Abandoned shopping malls became storage depots. Industrial yards filled until access roads were nearly blocked. In some regions, trucks were stacked so tightly that workers had to climb over bumpers just to move between rows. Logistics teams scrambled to manage the overflow. Rail shipments were paused because dealers could no longer accept new deliveries. Transport carriers were rerouted or left idle. Storage contracts were negotiated at premium rates, draining millions in emergency costs. Every truck parked in those makeshift yards was not only losing value, but accumulating daily expenses. What made the situation even more dangerous was that these vehicles were never meant to sit. They were designed to move quickly from factory floors to driveways. The longer they remained parked, the faster their value eroded. In the accounting world, this created a cascading effect. Assets began behaving like liabilities. Inventory became debt. Executives realized that this wasn't a temporary bottleneck. It was a structural failure. There were more trucks than buyers, and no immediate path to correct the imbalance. Some industry insiders quietly speculated that the real number might be even higher once off-site inventory and delayed shipments were fully counted. And to understand how the company built a mountain no one wanted, you have to look at the system that told them to keep producing long after the market had shifted. General Motors did not build nearly 1 million unsold trucks by accident. It built them because its forecasting systems told executives demand would continue to rise. Those models were trained on decades of data that assumed one thing above all else: Americans would always want big trucks. But the world changed faster than the algorithms could adapt. Interest rates climbed, fuel costs rose, household budgets tightened. Younger buyers began choosing smaller, more efficient vehicles. Yet GM's projections still pointed upward. The models relied on patterns from a past era when truck loyalty was nearly unbreakable. Inside the company's analytics division, concerns quietly began to surface. Real sales were falling short of forecasts. Inventory was growing faster than expected. Some teams questioned whether the models were properly accounting for cultural shifts and financial pressure on consumers. But leadership continued trusting the numbers. Production schedules stayed aggressive. The result was a dangerous feedback loop. Factories kept operating at full speed while demand quietly collapsed underneath them. The company was building for a market that no longer existed. As the gap widened, panic spread. Executives began receiving internal reports showing the scale of the imbalance. The system that was supposed to protect the company had done the opposite. It had pushed GM deeper into risk by convincing leaders that everything was still under control. By the time the truth became undeniable, it was too late to slow down gently. The only option left was to stop entirely. And when the shutdown came, the damage didn't land on executives first. It landed on the people who had the least time to prepare. When the shutdown orders reached the plants, everything changed in a single moment. Assembly lines that had roared with activity the day before fell silent. There was no gradual wind down, no long transition period, no chance for workers to prepare. Shifts were cancelled. Overtime disappeared overnight. Entire crews were told to wait for updates that never came. Many workers had built their lives around the stability of these jobs. Now they faced uncertainty they could not control. In factory towns, the impact was immediate. Local restaurants saw fewer customers. Small businesses braced for declining sales. Families worried about paying mortgages, medical bills, and tuition. Even supervisors struggled to provide clarity because they were just as in the dark. What made this shutdown feel different was the reason behind it. This wasn't caused by a strike or a shortage. It was caused by too many trucks. Workers couldn't understand how a company could produce so much and sell so little at the same time. GM's official language focused on stabilization and market recalibration. But those words offered little comfort to people whose livelihoods were suddenly at risk. The shutdown was not just a corporate decision. It was a human crisis unfolding in real time. And as fear spread through factory towns, the financial pressure was about to move outward into the dealerships that had once relied on steady turnover to survive. While workers faced uncertainty inside the factories, a quieter collapse was unfolding across thousands of dealership lots. Every unsold truck sitting on a dealer's property represented borrowed money. Most dealerships rely on floor plan financing, a system where banks pay for inventory up front and dealers repay the loan when the vehicle is sold. Under normal conditions, this works smoothly. Vehicles move quickly and interest costs remain manageable. But when demand stalled and shipments kept arriving, that balance broke. Dealers suddenly found themselves holding massive inventories that weren't moving, while daily interest charges continued to pile up. Some were paying tens of thousands of dollars every month just to keep trucks on their lots. Others faced six-figure financing bills. In rural markets where full-size trucks had once been guaranteed sellers, rows of unsold vehicles sat untouched. Managers began cutting staff, reducing marketing budgets, and delaying expansion plans just to stay afloat. Conversations shifted from sales goals to survival strategies. The psychological toll was just as heavy. Owners who had spent decades building their businesses now wondered if they would survive the year. Many quietly contacted lenders to renegotiate credit lines or seek temporary relief. But relief was uncertain, and time was not on their side. As pressure mounted, it became clear that this was no longer a localized problem. The financial strain was spreading through the entire system, and when markets sense instability, they react without hesitation. Wall Street was already watching. The reaction from financial markets was swift. Analysts began revising their outlook on General Motors, interpreting the shutdown not as a temporary pause, but as a sign of deeper structural weakness. Investor confidence wavered. The stock reflected that anxiety, and conversations inside financial institutions shifted toward risk management rather than growth. Credit agencies also took notice. Internal discussions hinted at possible downgrades if GM failed to stabilize operations quickly. Bond markets priced in uncertainty, making it more expensive for the company to borrow for future projects. Capital quietly moved toward automakers with leaner inventories and steadier demand patterns. At the same time, the shutdown ignited a political storm. Lawmakers seized the moment, framing GM as either a cautionary tale of corporate mismanagement or a victim of broader economic forces. In factory districts, representatives demanded answers and hinted at intervention. Some accused the company of abandoning workers. Others pointed to rising interest rates and economic policy as the true culprits. The crisis became a talking point in hearings, speeches, and campaign messaging. It was no longer just about trucks. It was about the future of American manufacturing. But while politicians debated and investors repositioned, another powerful force was preparing its response. Inside union halls, frustration turned into determination. Workers who had spent years building these vehicles now felt betrayed by a system that had failed to protect them. Meetings filled quickly as members demanded clarity, accountability, and action. Union leaders recognized that General Motors was vulnerable. A company grappling with stalled production and swelling inventory could not afford a prolonged labor battle. That reality shifted the balance of power. Whispers of targeted stoppages and coordinated demonstrations grew louder. Members who had never participated in serious action before now volunteered to join. The tone shifted from fear to defiance. For these workers, the shutdown was not just a corporate mistake. It was an existential threat to their livelihoods and communities. Union strategists studied the situation carefully, preparing to leverage this moment. They understood that this rare alignment of financial stress and public attention gave them influence they had not held in years, and as labor prepared to push back, the crisis was about to move beyond America's borders, where competitors were already watching closely. While America debated the meaning of General Motors' shutdown, the rest of the world interpreted it as something else entirely, a strategic opening. Global automakers have watched Detroit for decades, measuring their own progress against the dominance of US giants. Now, one of those giants had stumbled. Japanese manufacturers moved first. Toyota and its competitors doubled down on hybrids and compact models, expanding output in regions where fuel efficiency and affordability were already winning. Their leadership recognized that reliability and conservative inventory strategies were becoming powerful advantages in an uncertain market. In South Korea, brands accelerated marketing for electric and fuel-efficient vehicles, positioning themselves as stable alternatives while American production remained frozen. They framed consistency as a virtue, assuring buyers that their supply chains were resilient and their pricing predictable. China's manufacturers moved aggressively into emerging markets. With strong state backing and flexible production models, they launched pricing campaigns across Southeast Asia, South America, and parts of Eastern Europe. Their message was simple: affordable mobility without risk. Market share shifts were subtle at first, but they added up. Every percentage point lost by General Motors represented ground gained by a competitor. Analysts began talking about a slow rebalancing of global automotive power. And as rivals surged, another crisis was quietly unfolding inside the web of companies that fed GM's factories. General Motors' shutdown did not stop at the factory gate. It rippled outward into a vast network of suppliers that depended on consistent orders to survive. When production froze, contracts were delayed or cancelled. Smaller firms felt the impact almost immediately. Stamping plants, electronics manufacturers, and raw material providers suddenly faced gaps in revenue. Many had built their payrolls and operations around GM's demand. Now that demand had vanished overnight. Some suppliers cut shifts to conserve cash. Others paused expansions or sought emergency financing. A few faced the possibility of permanent closure. Supply chains thrive on predictability, and the sudden loss of orders created instability that spread from one company to the next. Executives scrambled to renegotiate contracts and find new customers. But transitions like this take time. The shutdown exposed how tightly interconnected the industry had become and how fragile that network truly was. And as governments around the world began to respond, another shift was already underway among everyday drivers. Across the globe, buyers were changing their priorities. Rising interest rates, higher fuel costs, and economic uncertainty made large trucks less appealing. Many consumers began choosing smaller, more efficient vehicles that aligned better with tighter budgets. In Europe and Asia, compact models outsold traditional pickups by wide margins. In emerging markets, affordability and reliability mattered more than size or power. Even in the US, younger drivers gravitated toward efficiency and flexibility. Electric vehicles gained attention, but hesitation remained. Charging infrastructure gaps and high upfront costs slowed adoption. Consumers wanted practicality, not promises. The symbolism of the oversized truck, once central to American identity, no longer resonated everywhere. As preferences shifted, General Motors' inventory became a symbol of an era fading away. This wasn't just a market correction, it was a cultural shift, and it signaled that the industry was entering a new chapter, one defined not by tradition, but by adaptability. What happened at General Motors was not just a corporate misstep, it was a warning flare for an entire industry that believed the future would always look like the past. The shutdown did not come from a single bad decision, a single executive, or a single model line. It came from a system that failed to recognize how quickly the world was changing. For decades, size meant strength, volume meant security. More trucks meant more success. But the numbers that once defined stability now reveal vulnerability. When consumer habits shifted, when borrowing became more expensive, when priorities changed, the old assumptions collapsed under their own weight. General Motors didn't cause that shift, it exposed it. This crisis showed how fragile even the largest companies can be when they rely too heavily on projections that no longer reflect reality. It revealed how deeply connected the auto industry is to everyday life, from factory towns and dealerships to global supply chains and household budgets. The ripple effects will not disappear overnight. They will reshape how cars are built, sold, and financed for years to come. And the most important lesson may be this: the next collapse will not begin with a factory shutdown or a headline. It will begin quietly, with people choosing not to buy, with consumers moving on before companies realize the ground beneath them has shifted. The future of the auto industry will not be written in boardrooms alone. It will be written by the choices of drivers everywhere. Once again, thanks for watching this video. If you got something out of this, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. And hey, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Agree, disagree, or something in between. I'd love to hear it.